Thank you so much, Natalie, for being here. I'm so excited that you're here because honestly, it's an absolute sensation. Your book is just absolutely just amazing and so important for so many people. And I have to say, especially women. So I'm just so glad that you're here with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And that's just a lovely thing to say about the book. Like you're making me grin here.
Honestly, because I'm going to do a brief introduction to who you are because you deserve a good introduction, and then we'll go straight into this important subject of people pleasing and boundaries, essentially, which is such a huge issue. So, without further ado, Natalie Lue is the author of the hugely popular relationship and self esteem blog Baggage Reclaim, along with 5 books, including Mr. Unavailable and The Fallback Girl. She also hosts the Baggage Reclaim Sessions podcast, which has over 3 million downloads. For nearly 2 decades, she's shared the journey of her transition from toxic relationships to love, care, trust, and respect. Her work has been mentioned and featured in the likes of the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, BBC, the Sunday Times Magazine, and USA Today. We're talking about her new book, which is The Joy of Saying No, a simple plan to stop people pleasing, reclaim your boundaries, and say yes to the life you want, which obviously explains quite a lot about what we're about to talk about. So, of course, I've got to ask, so why do you think we struggle to say no and want to people please?
I think it's because we are socialized and conditioned to believe that no is a dirty word. And also that being honest, even though we're, for instance, told not to lie and how honesty is important, we also receive conflicting messages that actually saying how we truly feel about something, saying what we need or want, upsets people. It can inconvenience them. We can look like we're rude or difficult or selfish, and we don't want to be perceived that way. In the book, I talk about how if you're not a child right now, then you grew up during the age of obedience, which is where the
Mm,
disciplining, communicating, and interacting with children centered on making children as excessively compliant with authorities.
gosh.
So it was all about, you know, being really, really obedient. And what that's actually taught us to do is to have some sort of very distorted and conflicting messages about what being good means, what being bad means, but also when you're taught to be compliant, that's not consciously consenting. And it's difficult, well, it's impossible to be just compliant and also consider your needs, desires, expectations, feelings, and opinions at the same time. So we were taught to be disconnected from our bodies. We were taught it was like, oh, it's more important to obey an authority than it is to recognize my feelings or my thoughts or what's going on in my body. And that's why we're where we're at today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. God, it's kind of scary actually. But there seems to be a lot of fear, I think, behind it. And so, what do you think that fear is behind saying no?
So, as humans, we are rather primal and primitive human beings, despite our evolution. So that part of our brain that handles fear, the amygdala, is still very primitive and is sort of primed to protect us from what it thinks is danger. And so I think that these messages that we've received, this conditioning that we have gone through, has ended up creating the sense that yes means belonging and safety and security, and we can advance ourselves because of course humans are all about meeting their needs. And so conversely, we see no as a threat.
Hmm.
So we see no as a threat to our safety and security. We think that it's going to invite conflict, criticism, disappointment, loss, rejection, additional stress. And I think that we have had experiences where people have said no to us, or where we've expressed our limits, or where something, we've maybe tried to express a boundary or who we are, and we have internalized some of those reactions as, oh, that was a very bad thing. And
Mm.
the more that we have told ourselves that that is a very bad thing, it's really reinforced this deep sense of fear about no. And we then, with all of this conditioning that we have, we grow up and we go out into the world and we try to forge, our interpersonal relationships, and we repeat those patterns that we've already learned around pleasing. And then we go
Mm,
into the workplace. Well, we might go to, for instance, university first, but we will
mhm,
eventually most likely find ourselves in the workplace. And of course, when you think about how work environments have a boss and there are
mm,
co-workers, that boss pushes our buttons about compliance. We start to get that sense of being obedient again. And also, these co-workers probably remind us of our siblings, or possibly even our parents, or they might remind us of like friends that we went to school with, or bullies. And so
mm.
there's so much sort of going on in there, and all of us are in some way trying to pursue a sense of, this is what will make me be a good, happy, or successful person. And of course, then we don't want to do things that get in the way of that, and that's why we're afraid of saying no.
God, yeah, it's so true, and it's so complex, isn't it?
Mm.
And I was just wondering, I was mentioning this before, just before we got started, which is why do you think women are more likely to be penalized for saying no?
Oh, women have way less margin to say no. It's just how it is, because we're all, every single one of us on this planet is in a system of patriarchy.
Mm,
And that patriarchal system uh, basically facilitates advancing the power of men. And it's not that men and boys don't receive messages around people pleasing. They do, but the
mm,
messages that they receive are about facilitating the advancement of power. So it's like, be strong, buck up, don't show your emotions. And of course, those things are very problematic, but it's all about, actually, if you do those things, you're going to have more power. Whereas the messages that we receive as girls and then as women is, be sweet, be meek, be mild, you know, don't, make waves, close your legs because that looks slutty. Make sure that you are
mm,
doing all the right things so that you get picked and somebody wants to, settle down with you and marry you. Make sure you have kids. Women have to tick all of the boxes. Don't be too loud because that's going to
mm,
scare people off. Ooh, that seems aggressive and angry because you spoke up there. So we
mm,
have received these patriarchal, sexist, ageist, ableist, all
mhm.
the isms and the ists messages that really send us message that, oh, we need to comply
Yeah,
so that we are safe and secure and so that we are chosen. And that is why we we will struggle more with people pleasing, easily more
yeah.
so.
God, that's awful. And this has happened to me before, which is how do we say no before our body basically steps up from doing so through burnout and stress? Because I've burnt out just because I didn't say no and I didn't know when to say no.
Yeah. So, and this is an interesting thing, because when we experience burnout or other forms of stress related to illness, it's the equivalent of having run multiple red and amber traffic lights.
Mm,
And so it wasn't like there wasn't an issue before, and then suddenly it's like, boom, this thing has happened, and now it's burnout. We've been ignoring, dismissing, rationalizing ourselves into avoiding saying no. And it's almost like you're treading water, just trying to sort of keep up with this. And I think
mm,
that part of the struggle of how we get there is we're, people pleasing and working in these ways is a very sort of automated or almost automatic habits, things that we have learned over time. And so we're often unconsciously responding to underlying tension and anxiety that's prompted by other people's expectations or people making requests or demands
mm,
on our bandwidth, our time and our energy and our effort. And so the burnout becomes this massive watershed moment in our life that causes us to really reflect on, how did I get here? And
mm,
then starting to notice, well, what are those feelings that I had become so desensitized to that I didn't even notice them until it all basically hit me really hard with burnout. I
yeah.
remember talking to somebody and she said that she was 2 years into recovering from burnout.
Ugh.
that she was still not in a place where she felt that she could go back to work. And what had happened was that she had started working somewhere. I think that she was maybe relatively new in the work field, like probably maybe recently graduated from university. She had been a straight A student all the way
Mm,
through school. She was always praised for effort and,
mm.
just putting in, all the hours. So when she arrived, and they were giving her more responsibility, and within 2 weeks, she saw something like 20 people leave,
Oh God.
which is, by the way, a big red flag. But
Yeah.
when they started giving her more responsibility in the face of this, she felt flattered by it
Yeah.
because it played
Mm,
to this good girl, achieving student, good
yeah.
employee. And then it just kept coming and coming. And she said, looking back, she recognizes actually that she was pretty uncomfortable from the off, but she wanted to be good.
Mm,
And she figured that surely at some point they'd realize it was too much, but it just kept coming and coming, and she had complete breakdown
jeez.
from it.
Ugh.
And she was 2 years into recovery when she was telling me that. And so I think that part of it is that now when we've gone through burnout, or we just realize that we often just automatically say yes without considering ourselves, we have to make a really conscious decision to be very intentional and slow down. Like that means that we're not the person who should say yes on the hoof, right? We're the person who
Mm,
is going to have to pause and get a sense of, "Ooh, how is my body feeling in this moment? But also, what have I got on my plate right now? What's in my schedule right now? How am I feeling in myself? What have I got coming up?" And that means that in that instance, we're also probably going to have to be that person that says, "Let me get back to you."
mm,
Because we can be our own worst enemy when we are in that zone of almost automatically saying yes. And the only way out of that, when it is almost automatic and then you just keep going and going until you collapse, is that you have to make this, it's almost like you're in a contract with yourself where you say, from now on, I have to rigorously check my diary. I have to really check in with myself. I have to give myself time to really consider this and only go back when I've truly considered myself and whether I actually want and need to do this thing. And
mm.
that is the beginning of breaking that. And it is a work in progress. Like for me, I the thing that I can be that I have to keep an eye on is I will say yes to stuff and I will check the calendar, but then I will go through phases where I'm like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, sure, I can do that," because 'cause I'm so excited by whatever it is, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
like, what have I done?" And so the best thing for me is to have a paper diary and the online calendar and to really just give myself that time, but I still have those pockets of where I suddenly go, I've got too many things going on
Mm,
here and I have to call back. So I've learned that I'm unrealistic with my time. I imagine that I am going to get way more done in a certain period of time or that I can handle more than I can. So actually, what I've had to learn to do is to be like, should probably only say yes to about 60 to 70% of the stuff. And even
mm.
then, you probably still be pushing it because my 60 to 70% is probably somebody else's, 100%.
Yeah, that's so true actually. It is very subjective, isn't it? And actually speaking of, like, do you think in your opinion that is the worst consequence of never saying no, which is burnout, or is there even far worse consequences of it?
So not, when we avoid saying no when we need, want to, and should, it's going to take a toll on our emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, and possibly on our financial well-being, depending on
Mm,
what we're doing. Now, I think a lot of us have this idea that we're almost separate from our bodies, that the mind is separate. But the
mm,
choices that we're making and whether we're saying yes or no, or yes and no authentically or not, have a direct impact. They take a toll on our bodies, and that includes our minds, but they can also take a toll on the relationships that we're in. and also sort of the types of situation that we will opt into and struggle to get out of. So I
Mm.
think burnout, stress related illness, really that sort of the thing that kind of knocks you flat. I would say if it's not number one, then it's number two. But the other one would
Mm.
be as well that if you really have an issue with saying no, aside from the burnout or breakdown, something like that, you can find yourself in some pretty abusive
Yeah.
situations, whether that is a work or romantic or familial, but you can find yourself in some pretty abusive situations. And ultimately, if we go back to the consequence, it's the toll on the emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. So instead of saying actually about the relationship, it's more that you can find that you're trying to anesthetize yourself against all of this misspent yes. And so when we are anesthetizing ourselves against our people pleasing ways, what do we wind up doing? Excessively consuming alcohol,
Yeah.
food, overspending, gambling, it might be sex addiction, all of those, that sort of compulsive, that is coming from anesthetizing ourselves against the people pleasing. So, yes, I think that is really that, and burnout and stress related illness are the big tolls.
Yeah. Do you know what? And I was wondering this because there's like two parts to this, which is, do you think people pleasing is one systemic? Because obviously, when you have things like the model minorities,
Mm,
you get judged based on like productivity, which then obviously trickles down.
yeah.
But then at the same time, do you think also people pleasing is inherited from
Wow.
family?
Yeah, I know, and I think that those two things are actually sort of intermingled there. They talk about, what is it? Is it epigenetics? Is it where they talk about what gets
Yeah.
passed down, right? And I'm so glad you brought up about the model minorities. Something I talk about in the book is about how people pleasing is something that minorities can end up teaching their children, their family members to do as a form of good citizenship.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
that's where the whole model minority thing comes from, because it's like we are other and we are in this place where people think that we don't belong. So you have to go above and beyond. You better make sure that you don't have a hair out of place, you are clean. That's why we're often obsessed with hygiene and how
Hmm.
our homes look,
Yeah.
and making sure that we are like, we have straight A students for children, that they are
Yeah.
going to, grammar school or to, top notch school, they're getting the grades. And then it's like, well, now you need to go to university and you need to be getting the right types of jobs that we can go and talk to other people about
Yeah.
and say you're a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or that you've got 10 MBAs or whatever it is. And then it's like,
Oh
and you
my
better make sure
goodness.
you marry right.
That's right.
Don't come home and telling me, oh, now you want to be in a same sex relationship or something, because hold on a
Yeah.
second. Like, what are you trying to do to us as a family? This
Yeah.
is passed down, because actually, I do think that what minorities have been through and the trauma of that and those fears gets passed down. And even though we might not necessarily be aware of the ins and outs of what specific ancestors have been through, it's in us, and there then becomes this fear of, well, I mustn't make myself too visible because I might attract problems to myself,
Yeah.
or I have to make up for what my family has been through, so I can't go and be the person that I want to be and do the job I want to do. I now need to actually earn all the money in the world to fund all of my family. So I do
Yeah.
think that there is the systemic, and I also think that there is a level of inherited. The thing that I say to people is, look, of course, in understanding the journey we've traveled into becoming a people pleaser, it could be easy to go, oh, I can see how my mom said this, or my dad said this, or my grandparents. And it's not about blaming the parents, because actually, if we were raised in the age of obedience, so were our parents and grandparents and
Yeah.
great grandparents in the previous generation. This has been going on for hundreds of years.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I think you're right. It's a new thing essentially that we're starting to take control back of our own lives and our own decision making. Because obviously we've seen the detriment to what our health, just by saying yes to everything.
Mhm.
And do you think, like, we've spoken about these relationships that we've built? Do you think we can ever have really good, honest relationships with people pleasers?
So the thing about, and I think that this is the thing that shocks a lot of people pleasers. So people pleasing, as well intentioned as we may be, it's a form of lying.
Mm,
And people pleasing is a form of hiding. So it's like wearing a mask or a costume. You're not really being yourself. And if you're not being yourself, then that is a block to intimacy. And so when we become more aware of our people pleasing, we can deepen our relationships. But something that shocks people pleasers is when, for instance, they are broken up with by somebody and they go, but I don't understand. I was like a model girlfriend, a model
yeah,
boyfriend, a model spouse. I was being and doing everything that they wanted. I don't get
yeah.
it. I don't understand why they turn around to me and said, I feel like I don't know you. But
Yeah.
something I have to explain to people is if if your partner is saying to you, what do you like? And you're like the woman at the beginning of Coming to America who, jumps, hops up and down on one leg and barks like a dog. And you're like, I like what you like. We have this misunderstanding that that's what a partner wants. Actually, somebody who wants a genuinely mutually fulfilling, loving relationship does not want a yes
Yeah.
person. They want to know that the person that they're with is being who they are. People don't feel safe with somebody who tells you what you think you want to hear, who avoids
Yeah.
conflict, who plays their cards close to their chest, who maybe the first time you know that something is bothering them, something is wrong, that they're mad at you, is when they've kind of held it to themselves, continue to try to people please you. And then when they finally had enough, they snap and they're like, after everything I've done for you, and
Yeah.
I sacrificed myself and blah, blah. And they're going, whoa, like, where is all of this coming
Yeah.
from?
Yeah.
So,
Totally.
and I know it can be hard for us as people pleasers. And bear in mind, I'm a recovering people pleaser. I've been a recovering people pleaser for, like 17 and a half years. It is a work in progress because we've been socialized and conditioned into this. We have to give ourselves grace. But if what we want is the connection and the intimacy of our relationships, and we want to feel safe and secure in our relationships, that does mean cutting back on the people pleasing. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect about it,
Mm.
but you need to cut back on it. You need to start noticing where it shows up. And in relationships, that is often pretending to be something you're not asking for help, not admitting that you're struggling, you know, being like, I like what you like, and merging into your partner. Only somebody who's
Oh
shady
no.
wants you to do that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. You don't get any respect that way at all.
No, and people don't know where they stand with you. And people pleasing is like creating a debt and then expecting other people to pay it off. It's like, look, I'll sacrifice myself for you. I'll do all of these things for you. And now you're going to pay me back by never arguing with me, by never criticizing me, by being the person that you want. And it's like,
Yeah,
nah, mate,
it's
just
a
show up in
deal.
a relationship.
Absolutely, because it's a deal they didn't sign up for as well.
Exactly. And then it feels like manipulation and entrapment. And,
Yeah,
and when we start to recognize that this is actually what's in people pleasing, a lot of us will feel very uncomfortable with actually continuing with that. We will want to make shifts in our behavior.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's just that so much expectation because I can completely relate to that with the family situations as well. The moment you say no and you stop that enmeshment
Mhm.
with your family, oh my god, it's so liberating. Just
Yeah.
walking away from that.
And
Um,
before that, we think, "Oh my gosh, this will be the death of
this
me
will
to
be
do
the
that."
death.
Uh, um,
It's Stockholm syndrome. Honestly, I say
yes,
it's Stockholm syndrome.
I
It's
agree.
yeah, it's just I think it took me a long time as well to just walk away and just be like, "This is not good for me anymore, so I'm gonna walk away." So, everything you said, I could completely relate to as someone with a chronic illness myself through stress, and it was just very much like, "Oh my god, your book completely just related to me on so many levels." So, Natalie, thank you so much for being here and speaking to me about this really important subject because I think it's going to help so many other people out there as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Sashity. It's just been a wonderful conversation.